There's been a lot of effort to understand and analyze the forces that opposed us. There has not been as much reflection on the mistakes that we in the gay community made early on. Had I been in a position of leadership at the time, particularly with my political background and orientation, I'm not sure I would have responded any differently. But I think it's very important to understand how the political environment influenced this community's leadership and response to the epidemic. Gay men were a despised minority. So by the time the first cases of the epidemic were recognized in 1981, a lot of the gay community, to one extent or another, was operating under the sense that we were under attack, that there was a target on our backs. We were being condemned in the most vile terms. Our families and our friends who maybe didn't know much about homosexuality started hearing these horrible things about us. When you take a part of your society and you treat it so poorly, you marginalize it and you give it fewer chances in life, you criminalize it, inevitably there are going to be public health consequences from that. There was a real decision, and I really believe it was a decision, to allow us to die. When you have kind of crossed that Rubicon, okay, I'm a gay man, and you begin to have sexual contact and relation, and you find people who like and appreciate you, your homosexuality is part of what they are attracted to, not something that repels them. So for the first time in your life, for the very first time in your life, you feel accepted for who you are. Something you've never felt from your parents or from your family or from your school or from your churches or whatever. So there's a tendency to revel in that. We were so alone with each other that we created community through a sort of hypersexuality with each other, where we became each other's brothers. I don't regret the sexual contacts that I had. I don't regret the promiscuous times that I had. There was something that I gained from that in terms of feeling a part of a community, in terms of learning about myself, but it had its consequences as well. We had created a sexual ecology that so greatly facilitated transmission of pathogens. Whatever the pathogen was that was making people sick, we needed to interrupt that transmission. That required a much more detailed discussion about the sexual practices that gay men engaged in that the public was not eager to hear, rather than getting into the nitty-gritty detail of how to interrupt transmission of sexually transmitted infections, namely through the use of condoms. The gay community leadership focused on a more generalized, fewer partners message. Just tone it down, boys. In June of 1983, that was the first time in the history of humanity that people who shared a disease got together and organized to assert their right to a voice in the decision-making that would so profoundly affect their lives at all levels of government and policy. It wasn't along the traditional benefactor-victim model of charity social service delivery. It was a peer-to-peer model. We were willing to experiment. We smuggled drugs in from other countries. Then we began to get more strategic about how to use civil disobedience or street theater or demonstrations or targeted protests to change policies and actions. We were constantly fighting bureaucracies and red tape that weren't operating with the urgency that we were operating with to save our lives. So we were not victims. The responsibility I feel as a survivor is to share what happened from my vantage point, what I experienced, what I saw, and to do so for all the others who didn't make it, and to witness for those who were actually there and lived it, who had the courage to go public and to assert the voice of people with AIDS. That very, very early and courageous stand that they took created something that has enabled thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands to live, including me.